Welcome to the Coffee with Karen podcast, a weekly chat show discussing everything from holistic health to current affairs from a mental, physical and spiritual perspective. Get your weekly cup of positivity with a sprinkling of woo-woo.
Awesome. So we are live. So welcome to a Coffee with Karen, a cup of positivity with just a sprinkling of woo-woo. This is where I interview. My guests tend to be some kind of coach or consultant or therapist or healer, but that really doesn't explain exactly what they do. So this is an opportunity for them to share with the audience a little bit about them, a little bit about their story. So I'm your host, Karen Roberts. So we also have a podcast network where we have created a whole directory because of that fact. Everybody has the same title, coach, but they're all doing different things and they're all serving a different segment of society and they all have different tools in their toolboxes. So come to KarenRobertsCoaching.com. You'll see the beginning of our directory, our first 20 amazing people doing amazing things out there, and some of them are having their own radio show on Mintwave Radio, as I am the new owner of that, and also having their own podcast because we believe in collaboration as opposed to competition. And if any coaches are struggling, we also have the academy where we help people design, create, market and sell their own programs online, because here's a clue, it's not just about posting on social media. So today's guest, this is slightly different and I've never heard of this myself. So Kate, if you'd like to share with the audience, first of all, just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hello, thank you. So I live in Kent in the UK. And I have been a hairdresser for 23 years. I've been in education for about 19, 20 years. And a couple of years ago, I really felt that I had all this wealth of knowledge in all these different areas of hairdressing, apart from the actual fundamentals of the hair and scalp. And I decided, after following a hair health evening that I went to, which was hosted by the Fellowship of British Hairdressing, straight away after I left that evening, I went and emailed the Institute of Trichology in London and signed up for a 2-year trichology course.
Now, trichology. Now, is it just me or have any of the listeners ever heard about trichology? So can you share what on earth is trichology?
Yeah, so this is partly why I'm here today, to actually give people the information on what a trichologist is and what we do, because I cannot help people if they don't know I exist. So for me to say that I didn't know much about the hair and scalp when I started the course, even though I'd done 23 years in hairdressing, really proved right when I did the course. It's 2 years just studying the function of the hair and scalp. So you would go and visit a trichologist if you had hair loss, hair shedding, any scalp problems. You could have psoriasis, eczema, seborrheic dermatitis, anything basically that causes you any discomfort, any problems, any worries. We are here to help. So we are specialists in that area. A little bit like a dermatologist, you might see if you had a problem with your skin. We're specialists in the hair and scalp. And you might be surprised sometimes. A lot of people think, especially if they've got something like psoriasis or dandruff or something like that, not quite sure how to manage it. They might just think, oh, this is just the way it is. There's nothing we can do. You might be surprised sometimes at the advice or the help that you could get.
Well, I mean, I've obviously heard of a dermatologist, but so explain what really is the difference then. I would have thought, so in my lack of knowledge completely, that if it's to do with the skin, it's the same thing with the scalp. So obviously that's very, very wrong.
I wouldn't say it's wrong, because obviously we do have skin on the scalp. And I know that in America, their dermatologists tend to study the hair and scalp as well. So in America, a trichologist is not quite as a well-known thing because the dermatologists tend to be very well educated and they tend to study all of it. But there are trichologists that do practice in America and do have clients and see clients. But over here, the dermatologist would mainly focus on the body. I'm sure if you had, for example, psoriasis presents in many areas. So I'm sure if you went to a dermatologist and you had it, you know, on your forehead or your scalp and your elbows, they're going to give you some good advice for that, of course. But from a hair loss side of it, especially, or a hair growth side, they're not going to have as much knowledge because the hair on the skin is obviously completely different to the hair on the scalp,
right,
in how it presents. So we love hair, basically.
And that makes sense. So also, okay, as you can see, this is not my hair. It's not my natural color. So obviously, because I'm mixed race, my hair isn't like European. It's not straight at all. It's very frizzy. And then obviously Afro hair is very different again. So is there a difference?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. And funnily enough, I've had a really good discussion very recently about this because, again, in the UK, where we study hair, the NVQ hairdressing course until now didn't expect you to work on Afro textured hair.
Which is why I always had problems. Even my daughter, who's got very more European hair, but has still got that frizz, and actually it's not great when she goes to a standard hairdresser because they just don't know how to deal with it, as they absolutely do not know how to deal with my hair. Obviously, I'll go to an Afro hairdresser and I just have it braided because it's easier to manage. So the change is coming. Is that what you're saying? So the training is changing?
Yeah, and I know that there are mixed feelings about it because it depending on the area, some people might say, well, how am I supposed to get the models in? And I understand that, but I also feel like that's one of the problems is there are these barriers. I know people who say to me, their son's only very young, he has very short haircut, but he's black, he's got Afro hair. So there are only 2 barbers in the whole of the area that will cut his hair because they take one look at him and they go, oh no, I can't do that.
Yeah, they just don't go. I always had the problem.
They're not confident.
I was brought up in Tunbridge Wells, so you know I would travel up to Brixton to go and get my hair done or to go and get hair. And even now, I mean, I'm 50 for crying out loud. My niece, who's very, very dark skinned with very, very Afro hair, although she's still mixed. Again, she's still travelling up. She came up to my hairdressers in Catford, literally a couple of months ago to get her hair done because nobody does it, which seems phenomenal that we haven't moved on since then.
But unfortunately, I think, I mean, there's a lot of movement around inclusivity in hairdressing, even talking about things like the gender neutral pricing, accommodating
gender neutral pricing.
Explain. Well, again, if you're a trans lady or a trans man, you feel the same way. You're not always going to just be able to walk into a normal salon and they might say, oh yeah, sure, we can deal with your hair and meet your needs. So there's lots of different areas. And I know it's really difficult because as everything, we become aware of all these things and we want to include everyone. I know there's a lot of pressure on hairdressers to be like, oh, right, so now you're saying I've got to do Afro hair and I've got to do transgender people's hair and I've got to do this and I've got to do that and I've got to do hair extensions and hair loss and everything else.
A lot of extra training. Well, I suppose in business, it's good to niche. I mean, there's nothing wrong in that, is there?
There is nothing wrong in that. But at the end of the day, I feel like when you're learning to work with Afro textured hair, even if you don't have any Afro clients come in, like you said, you might get mixed race people come in. The variation now on the hair that we get is extreme. And learning how to deal with Afro textured hair can really help you deal with curly hair in general.
Oh, absolutely. Because even that seems to, like I said, my
Yeah.
daughter, you wouldn't know that she's mixed race, but yes, her hair texture, yes, it's curly, and they, for some unknown reason, it's almost like they could only deal with straight hair. It's got to be
Yeah.
straight.
And I do think part of that is with the hairdressers is you're slightly more comfortable doing the hair, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Although saying that, I've never had curly hair and I love cutting curly hair and I love dealing with it, but I'm not scared of it. And I've always said, well, sure, I'll work with it. I'll give it a go. And that gave me confidence in that area.
Right.
But I do understand, especially with Afro textured hair, I think part of the problem is the shrink factor.
Yes.
So when you take an inch off,
very odd haircuts when I was.
Yeah. So that's obviously very scary. If you do that once and you cut an inch off and then it looks like you've taken 4, that's quite scary. So I can understand people say, oh, I don't want to do that again. But there are many differences with the different racial hair types. And even if you've got a combination of, you need to be aware of that. Like, it's really good to have that knowledge, because otherwise in the future, as you know, areas change, demographics change.
We've got to adapt. Nothing stays the same, right? We've got to, and it's about time. As I say, I'm 50 now.
Well, like I say, I feel like if people can look at it as an opportunity to learn and grow, of course, I'm not expecting everyone to start doing braiding or say that they're an Afro hair specialist all of a sudden. However, even for curly hair, I know there is a place in Bromley now that is a curly hair specialist salon, and she is booked. Yeah, she is booked up solid, just because other people, even with curly European hair, will look at it and go, oh, I don't know. So to a certain extent, it's the same for me with the trichology. Of course, I'm not expecting every salon to train as a trichologist, but again, the amount of hair loss and hair shedding we've seen, the increase in people's mental health and well-being problems, health issues. Hair shedding has been seen from vaccines, from COVID, from lockdown, from stress, from nutrition.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I would say, yes, stress. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we talk about stress on here a lot because it just makes sense. You know, people have got to remember that if whether stress coming from a real threat or a perceived threat, cortisol is just going to move everything to the extremities, because you've either got to run, fight, or freeze. So all the healing processes. So of course, why would it not affect your hair? It's going to affect everything else as well. So it's going to affect your whole health. So so you've seen a big difference, have you, in the last few years?
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny that you say that about the perceived threat, because I remember when COVID first came about and we were just about allowed to go outside, and I did feel like I was under attack. If I went down the high street, I was so conscious of anyone getting near me or coughing on me, or, oh, they're not wearing a mask or whatever. It was almost like, I know it sounds really dramatic, but it was almost like being in World War II and waiting for an air raid to come over, because it's this worry that you're kind of carrying around of this invisible threat.
Absolutely. And yes, it's the whole thing. You know, there's very few people that you know, that didn't have that. I mean, I wouldn't, but but that's a different thing. But for a lot of people, it was a massive thing. What about people like say the older ladies who would go maybe once a week to have a blow dry? Have you noticed, because a lot of them were incredibly frightened throughout, because you know they watched the same thing on telly and read the same newspapers, so stress was possibly more because they didn't have the internet maybe. Did you notice a difference in older women's hair?
I mean, I have to say, my clients, I don't have any kind of little old lady clients.
Oh, okay.
My clients who are even in their 70s, I mean, like you say, you're 50 and you've got pink hair, right? my clients who are in their 70s, they still have, within reason, very modern, fashionable haircuts. If I gave them a shampoo and set or a little blow dry, they would probably punch me in the face. So that people aren't, that, you know, people now who are 80 are like how people used to be when they were 60 or 70.
Yeah.
People are very much more active now, but I definitely did find that it was my retired older clients, to be fair, were the ones that were financially probably better off because they got their pension anyway. They didn't have any earnings affected. Sure. They had no worries, but they were definitely the ones that were most concerned for me to come round. They were like, we've cleaned everything with an inch of its life. We've disinfected everything. We'll wear our masks. We'll get your hair cut outside. We'll test before you come. For even now, some of them are still saying, "Oh, I've disinfected everything, and I'll wear a mask, and or we'll go outside." So they were very.
And did you notice a difference in their hair or their scalp?
Not really, to be honest, because like I say, if anything, they were probably least affected in a lot of ways. I have a neighbour who's 94, and every day of her life is quite like lockdown, really, because her family actually live in the house opposite, so they do come and visit. Right. And obviously during lockdown, they were just kind of still coming and standing at the door or waving at the window and dropping her shopping off. Right. I mean, she's actually a legend because, like I say, she's 94, and every day she still gets her little trolley and walks down to the post office and back. And during COVID, even I used to see her set off with her mask, and I think, oh God, please, just but she's fine, absolutely fine. But again, I think in a way, if they've got a bit of support, they were quite used to the isolation. Yeah. So again, I think because of COVID, it was very strange. So I've got a lady in her 60s who's had quite a lot of hair shedding quite a few times due to treatment that she's on, medical treatment. So she's had rapid shedding called telogen effluvium. She's had that probably 3 or 4 times since I've been doing her hair. I've been doing her hair about 20 years. So from medical treatment that she's had, it's a little bit like chemotherapy, radiotherapy. So she experiences massive shedding, but then it does grow back.
Okay, so it's not permanent.
No, she had no issues with the vaccine at all, no side effects, had COVID, didn't even hardly know she had it, said she was bored. You know, and then there's other people. I know a personal trainer who was doing fitness sessions online every single day, eats really healthily, really, really active, really fit and healthy, got long COVID, after 9 months, still couldn't walk up the stairs without getting out of breath.
Right. And hair, did it affect his hair and scalp?
To be honest, I think as a lady, I think her hair was okay. She has very short hair anyway. It's kind of, she shaves this, so it's shorter than mine. So if she had have lost hair, she probably could have masked that really well.
So what are the sort of common issues that then you deal with being a trichologist? You've mentioned psoriasis, but what sort of other things?
So again, it really does depend on the area. If you're in an area more like Catford or Brixton, then you do tend to see a lot more issues like traction alopecia.
Yeah, because it's pulling. I don't know how I got away with that. To be okay.
I mean, again, I think the practitioners are getting a lot better. And obviously, I understand that if you're going to go and get locks done or braids done, you want them to last. So, of course, you want them reasonably tight.
Yeah, some
if you're,
others, though.
Yeah, and if you're having braids done so tight that there's blood on your pillow and it hurts to sleep at night, then that's probably going to damage your hair follicles over time, right?
Be a sign, thankfully. I've never had that. I wonder whether would your scalp get? I mean, I presume my scalp's used to it. I've had braids since the 20s, I suppose, on and off.
But they're probably
scalp gets strong. I don't know.
I think your hair gets used to a certain amount of tension, but I think it's still gonna. And the other problem with doing braids and stuff is what we recommend is to change the pattern.
Right. Yeah.
So that you don't end up having the same pieces being put under pressure all the time. That can help quite a lot.
That makes a lot of sense.
And it's being around the front hairline where it's finer, where it's more fragile. Just really taking that into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
obviously, in any area, you will see male pattern hair loss because you can't stop genetics. We can try and we can offer, again, there's quite a few solutions.
Is that always genetics? Is that always genetics, men's hair?
Yeah. So male pattern hair loss, where you lose it in certain areas.
Oh, okay.
There's a scale called the Norwood scale, and there's actually photos of where you lose it, but it's kind of temples, crown. It gets thinner on the top, and then obviously eventually the temples and the crown join up, and they look like Prince William.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I feel very sorry for, because he's really in the public eye, and it's not a great look, bless him.
No.
But there we go. So that kind of pattern is genetic normally.
Right.
But obviously females do get that as well.
Right.
So it doesn't normally result in total hair loss in the same way, but female pattern hair loss is a thing as well, which is genetic, and it does mean, so when you see these little old ladies and the hair is thinner just on the top, that's normally genetic. So again, there's a lot of advice and help that we can offer with that, depending on the stage that you're at and how young you are, because it can happen as young as 24, even younger. Very rare, but it does happen. But that is obviously only going to go one way, especially if you don't intervene.
Yeah,
so
like
again,
anything. Yeah. And I suppose prevention is better than cure. Yeah.
And that's the other reason why I want people to know that trichology is available, because your prognosis is going to be a lot better if you're seen earlier. And I know another trichologist who says, you go to the dentist and check your teeth all the time. You go and get your eyes tested, you get your hearing tested. So why not get an MOT for your hair and scalp occasionally as well, and just make sure that everything's okay.
You just never would have thought it. So, well, this is why we're doing this, to people to hear about
the information.
It. What would maybe be the initial signs? Why would somebody out there that's listening to this and thinking, "Oh, my hair's all right"? What would be the initial signs to look for to make them think, maybe I should go and have a checkup?
Well, like I say, again, it depends on the issue. Male or female pattern hair, it's quite easy to kind of notice, because you start looking in the photos and you can see the scalp a little bit, or you start noticing that your hair is thinner than it used to be. If you have hair shedding, like telogen effluvium, that comes all over. So you'll notice a general thinning of the hair, and you might notice that the hair is coming out more. So if your boyfriend starts complaining that there's hair in the shower drain all the time, or you're finding hairs around on the carpet, or when you put your hair up in a ponytail, or it's a lot thinner than it used to be. With telogen effluvium, luckily it can be a temporary condition, because it is one of the ones that looks the most scary when it's happening, because you experience this mass hair loss. So you think, I'm not going to have any left at this rate. But again, with that, it's really about getting to the root cause early so that we can rectify that. Would
that be stress, or would that be diet? Would that be something to do with your gut?
Yeah. So it could be, obviously it can be what we call multi-etiological. So it could be a number of things, but it could be iron deficiency. A lot of people find that the hair density changes around puberty or menopause or childbirth. And again, things like the vaccine can do it, because your body, hair is a non-essential item. So when your body is put under any pressure, hair grows from the inside out. Yeah. So when your body's put under any pressure, so if you have an iron deficiency, if your thyroid is not okay, if your vitamins are low, like vitamin D, vitamin B12, omega-3, anything like that. So it could be that again, over lockdown, people did start to, well, not everyone, but a lot of people did start to turn to alcohol a bit, not eat very well because they were depressed, they were stuck indoors. So if you're not getting the right levels of nutrition, if you have surgery, I know someone recently that had that stomach surgery, like gastric band.
Mhm.
And then 3 months later, her hair started shedding.
She wasn't getting enough nutrients.
Well, they actually told her after her surgery that she wasn't allowed to take any vitamins.
Interesting.
I don't know why. So that is obviously not allowing your body to recover at optimum levels.
Yeah, that's just another like why have such drastic, obviously that's so obviously not good for your body in all areas. And it's interesting you say the iron, vitamin T, B12. I'm an absolute advocate for keto and even carnivore, because we've been told so often that beef is bad. And where do you get vitamin B12 from? Ooh, and where do we get iron from? So I think people have gone so far the other way that you know, a lot of these things are coming up. And just like you say, you know, you need your amino acids, you need your essential fatty acids, you need your iron. I think, and you need sunshine. So lockdown wouldn't have helped that either.
No, it didn't, exactly. And I think the problem is there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a vegetarian or vegan diet. However, especially things like omega-3, the best source for that is fish. So the only source you really have, a good one if you're vegan, is flax seeds, which is actually quite hard for the body to break down and digest. So it's very complicated. And the problem is not being vegan. The problem with some people is where they're so keen, they cut a whole load out of their diet very quickly.
It's too much.
And they're not always replacing it with enough relevant plant-based alternatives.
Absolutely. Which is the same for even the keto. If people just go keto, they don't do it in a healthy way. Because
then you're missing out.
Eat burgers.
Yes. But this is the problem with a lot of, even if you're vegan, it doesn't equate that you have a healthy diet, because you can live off chips or vegan KFC. You can still eat badly, no matter what your food principles are. You can still eat unhealthily.
So that is going to affect the hair and the scalp. What else? I mean, obviously, the gut. I mean, you know, I believe again everything stems from the gut, and because of all the medication and antibiotics and everything, people's gut flora is probably in an incredibly terrible way. Would that have something to do with the issues that you're talking about?
Yeah, I definitely think it does, because obviously if you're having something like food intolerances or IBS, because your gut is not able to process food properly, then that in itself is going to cause you stress and pain. And then the stress is probably going to not make you feel great, which could contribute to hair loss. But also, even if you're supplementing and even if you've got a really, really good diet, it's also about how your body absorbs those nutrients.
Exactly, which is going back to the omega-3, because if your omega-3 to 6 is out of whack, then there's a thickening of the cell and you can't actually absorb. So it doesn't matter what your diet's like, doesn't matter what supplements you're taking. If the nutrients can't pass through the cell wall, you're not actually going to absorb and utilize it. So
and it's also
is massive with regards to that.
And it's also about knowing what to take when. So I think if you take vitamin C, I can't remember what it is. I think you're not supposed to drink tea when you drink vitamin C, because it helps stop absorption.
Some things that you need to take. Vitamin C needs to be taken with zinc. Zinc pushes quite a lot of stuff into the cells. So yes, it is all about balance, which is why I think it can be dangerous to supplement, because if people don't know what they're doing, some vitamins, minerals can actually become toxic if you have too much. So everything needs to be in the right, which is why it is better to get it from your food and to absorb it that way, because when you're playing around with supplements and you don't really understand it, actually even that in itself can cause problems, which I don't know whether it affects your skin and scalp. That's not my area of expertise, but on the rest of the body, it will definitely have an effect.
Yeah, well, obviously heterochromia, which is too much iron, hemochromatosis, which is too much iron, is just as bad, and it can make your hair really weak and brittle and dry. So by all means, I'm not saying if your hair feels a bit rubbish, go and take loads of iron, because if you don't need it, don't take it. But again, we as a trichologist, we can write a letter to your GP. We can recommend which tests. After we ask you questions, we'll know whether it's likely to be stress or a deficiency or a thyroid problem or a hormone problem, or it could be a physical trauma. So, and then we could write a letter to your GP, because I know a lot of people, it's very difficult to get hold of their GP, or to get them to listen, or to get them to empathise and understand. GPs, although they study hair, they don't do, in the general study of what they do, it's a very small amount. They don't specialise in it.
No, not at all. They don't even study nutrition.
No. So to try and, some people wouldn't want to approach their GP. So we can write a letter for them to recommend which blood tests we think they would need, so that then you know which vitamins you need to up. Obviously, again, I know a little bit about nutrition, but I also know nutritionists that I can refer people to if they need to help with that side of it, so that they don't keep getting deficiencies. And then we can look at the blood tests as well. So the other problem is the blood tests come back, they're on a scale. So you might be told, oh, your iron is within normal range, but your iron levels might actually be way out of optimum range, and they might still be low. So we might look at that and say, well, okay, they're not dangerously low, but they're still a long way off what they could be.
Yeah, you want to thrive, not just survive, for crying out loud.
And unfortunately, the GPs are only looking for us to really stay alive.
Yeah.
Right? And keep us.
They're not better to go to somebody who is an expert in nutrition or because you're going to get different advice. As I said, doctors, as wonderful things that they do, they're not qualified in nutrition. So
but they also don't have the time.
No, of course they don't. They've got enough on their plates, right?
Yeah. So trichology and probably nutrition, you're going to get an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, just talking about that.
To go to a specialist. So really, you are the go-to person for scalp issues, hair issues. Yeah. So what else is there? I mean, what other things do you cut? What other things do you cover? Is there anything else?
I mean, again, obviously you've got different other types of hair loss. So there's lots. So alopecia is a blanket term for anything hair loss. So there's lots of other different types of hair loss. There is things like alopecia areata, where you notice patches come and go on the scalp. There's also... And
what does that come from? How does that come about?
That can be autoimmune. So again, that can be quite difficult because it can kind of flare up. But again, things can make it worse. So I've known people with alopecia areata where they've said, if my hair loss starts to flare up and get worse, that's a sign for me that my nutrition's not on point, or I'm too stressed, or I'm not looking after myself properly.
Right.
But that can be triggered from an autoimmune reaction. So it's very difficult. Also, even things like kids, obviously, that have really bad scalp problems like psoriasis, eczema, trichotillomania. So there's trichotillomania is a psychological condition where you pull and break the hair.
Okay.
So
bad habit.
Yeah. So it's a little bit different because it is a psychological condition. It is very delicate one to deal with. And again, people can have that from age 6 or 7.
Wow.
So you might see children and their parents are like, she's got a bald patch in the back of her head and we don't know why. And the problem is because it's a response, a bit like biting your nails or picking your skin, or, even almost, it's not quite the same as self-harming, but it's that kind of, it's an unconscious reaction a lot of the time to a real traumatic stress response. So that can be quite a difficult one to deal with, but especially in children, you need that help and support because they need that help and support.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that's a very delicate situation. What you did mention earlier, which I wanted to touch on, is hormones. Now again, I just don't think people understand how much your hormones can affect you. So how do hormones affect issues to do with the scalp and the hair?
Well, again, if the levels aren't right, then that can majorly affect. So there's another condition called hirsutism, where you get hair in male areas. So you start to get more facial hair, and it's kind of thicker and more noticeable. Polycystic ovaries can cause that. They can cause excessive facial hair. Polycystic ovaries can also cause problems with the hair and scalp, including seborrheic dermatitis as well. A lot of the hormonal changes, again, such as menopause, can trigger hair loss because the estrogen levels drop. And obviously the hormone levels change. So the problem with our body is that it's quite a delicate system and we want to maintain that homeostasis. So any change in the different hormone levels, the body's quite sensitive to that and it doesn't always like it. So that in itself can be enough for the body to say, look, we've got a problem over here we need to deal with. We haven't got time to be making hair at the moment.
Right. So again, going back to similar, cortisol is a hormone. So it's going back to that. Yes, I can imagine its prime goal. It doesn't care what you look like,
Unfortunately, no.
It doesn't care what you look. I mean, this is where I come from. I come from the fitness industry. I studied nutrition, but I studied more on the keto diet for therapeutic purposes and fasting. So the effects of that on the body. So, and it's the same thing. You're not going to lose weight. You're not going to lose fat if cortisol is in your system because it's just going to hold on to it. So it doesn't matter how much exercise you're going to do, how much, what you think you're eating a good diet. If you don't deal with the stress first, then it ain't happening, which is why, again, I think so many people are suffering more. It's not just what they eat. It's not just what the exercise that they're doing, but it is the hormones. And I was fascinated sort of.
And also, it's this holistic approach. So even hairdressers in general, I think over the last couple of years, have really looked at their client as a whole and their well-being and their experience just more than... I think hairdressers were appreciated a lot more in lockdown because everyone really missed us. But I think we also were trying to give that little bit more to clients and not just be like, right, in and out for a haircut. We were trying to look after them and make sure that, because even with hormone levels as well and stress, even if you're still producing hair, the hair that you produce is not going to be the best quality. So it will go dry, it will go brittle, it won't look shiny, it might feel thinner because you're not operating at optimum levels. So, and that again can be quite distressing.
With people, it's, I always say what we need is one of those scanners like in Star Trek, where they can just scan the body and see where you're at, because like you say, you could be your body's phenomenal and it will do what it needs to do to keep that homeostasis. So if there's not enough iron, it will take it. Don't worry, it will drain whatever is in. It will drain from your bones. It will drain from. So the most important things are dealt with. And then all the extras which means you're flourishing and you're healing properly and all the other things, because it's just worried about that very moment. And it's quite phenomenal that some people don't realise that they're on the downward spiral because they feel okay because the body's keeping you alive. But just because you're being kept alive doesn't mean that you're in an optimum state. And we all want to be living in the best way possible with everything being healthy.
But having said that, I do think that a lot of people, it's not even that we don't realise. I think when you're in a really stressful situation, you just keep going. It's only afterwards when you sit down and go, oh God, that was actually really stressful. And as much as it seems awful, in a lot of ways, sometimes people having hair loss or hair and scalp problems can actually be a blessing in disguise. And it's the other issue that I have with GPs when they kind of say, oh, it's only hair, it's not important. Hair is one of the markers for us to show that there may be an underlying problem.
Yeah.
So if you experience something like hair shedding, you could actually be quite lucky, because if you're experiencing hair shedding or alopecia areata because you're in a really stressful place, it may be enough to make you stop and deal with that. Some people don't get those signs. And then the first sign they get is 10 or 20 years later when they have a stroke or a heart attack or something really serious.
Yes, there you go. So it could just be something, yeah, like you say, I suppose it's the body dealing with the least important in the body's eyes. In our eyes, we're like, we want our hair. But but body's far, you know, its primary goal is survival. The rest of it can go. So I suppose it's the least important thing. So yeah, that makes sense. It could be, see it in a positive light. That's the first sign. So deal with it. So if anybody is going through any of those situations that you just first discussed, how would they get in touch with you?
I mean, I am on Instagram. Well, I'm on everything. I'm on Clubhouse sometimes. I try and stay off there a little bit because I get sucked into a black hole of 4 hours later. Clubhouse, I think I'm hair therapy. Facebook, Instagram is hair therapy UK. On LinkedIn, people can message me if they want to ask me anything. If they want any advice, then obviously more than welcome. I've got 75 podcast episodes up myself now for the hair therapy podcast. So you may even find that there are answers within that. I try and cover a different topic every week. There's also real life stories on there as well from people that have had experiences with the problems that you might be suffering from, and that might give their perspective, because I really feel it's really important. Hair loss and even scalp problems can be very isolating, and it can be very hard. Some people don't even like to talk about it with their husband or their friends or family. A lot of the times people don't even really know what they're going through. So there's lots on there to help you feel like you're not alone and you're supported. But if you wanted to contact me and ask me anything or talk to me, then just send me a DM. Or if you go to the website, you can email me or contact me. If you want to book an online consultation with me for an hour, then obviously you're very welcome to do that as well. We can have a chat over Zoom. Again, can keep it all confidential. No one needs to know. Do it when everyone's out. If you live in Kent,
It's
I'll
funny.
come and see you.
Oh yes, yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, where is your place in Kent? And where can you see?
Yeah. So we're in Maidstone. I'm in the process now of setting up a private clinic, so that will be on the website updated as soon as it's all up and running, which I'm really excited about. I have also done two courses with L'Oreal and Trevor Sorby for the My New Hair charity, learning how to cut and fit wigs as well for cancer patients who are going through medical hair loss, because obviously that's another cause of hair loss. A big one is chemotherapy and medical treatment.
Yeah.
So even if people want advice on wigs or toppers or hair extensions or anything, or hair fibers, even, there's lots of other options people can have. If anyone's thinking about a hair transplant and they want some advice on that, any area really, then they can find me, I'm sure.
So for the listeners who can't see, the link is hairtherapyuk.com
on everything.
It's the same thing everywhere.
I'm taking over.
So, but how? Okay, so how did you come to be doing what you're doing? What is your story?
So like I say, I have been hairdressing a very long time. So I've been dealing with the hair and scalp. And over time, I think because we get so limited training on the hair and scalp, on hair diseases, conditions, when you have a client come in with alopecia or with really bad psoriasis, it is very limited on what you can actually do to help them. And as I said, because I've been in education for so long, I actually found it really difficult then to go on cutting courses or colour courses or styling courses to find inspirational new and different ideas, because I've worked with different colour houses. I've worked with people that have won British Hairdresser of the Year several times. I've worked with some amazing inspirational people, and I've been watching.
Yeah.
So I've seen it all. So like I say, because I'm a member of the Fellowship of British Hairdressing, they put on these educational events. And I went to a hair health evening in London with 2 trichologists. And again, one of those, Robert Eaton, he's actually won British Hairdresser of the Year, I think at least twice. He's amazing. And I just came away from that so inspired, because as a trichologist, I can then deal with all those other aspects. I can help people more. I can go in deeper. And it was an area that I really felt that I could learn. And trust me, I learned a lot.
Right.
A lot.
And I spoke, so it's about your setting the found. You can go to the hairdresser and they can make it wonderful with products and it'll look amazing. But if the foundation isn't set, that's either going to last for a day, or you're not even going to get to that stage. Is that where?
Yeah, and like I say, I'm not saying that every single hairdresser should train in trichology, absolutely. But in the same way, in a salon, you might have a balayage specialist or a hair up specialist. I really do think that it is important to have someone in there that might have done, maybe you can do an introductory course to trichology. Sometimes they're days long, sometimes they're a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And they're really, really interesting, just to get a slightly better idea. Having a hair and scalp specialist or a hair loss specialist in a salon could be really beneficial. And my other problem is that you get a lot of companies that market themselves as hair loss specialists when all they actually do is fit integration systems or fit wigs or toupees.
Right. So they're not, again, they're just putting a plaster on rather than solving the problem.
And if you put a plaster on a massive open wound that is actually infected and is going to spread, you're making the problem worse.
Yeah.
So you need that diagnosis first, and you need someone to actually understand what it is you have and be able to help you. So even as a hairdresser, all you do is find your local trichologist or dermatologist and be able to signpost your client to that professional, rather than saying, oh, well, I don't. Some hairdressers, if they notice hair loss on their client, won't even mention it because they don't have an answer.
So it's a taboo. Is it because they don't want him? Do they feel?
Yeah, or they don't want to upset them. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, solve the problem. So what are the solutions? So you've mentioned. So you've mentioned their nutrition, obviously stress, but what other solutions are there? Products, or are there what are the other solutions to some of these issues?
So again, I would much rather someone come to me sooner rather than later, because again, there's a lot of salons that sell, caffeine shampoo or products. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen on Amazon and places like that as well. You could spend thousands of pounds on products and not be any better for it.
Right.
And I would really like to prevent that for people. Like I said earlier, hair health starts from within. So anything you rub on the hair, you're treating the end, you're not getting to the root cause of it. However, there are lots of things we can do. So we have lots of different treatments. We do UV treatment, infrared treatment. There's laser, like lights, high frequency. We do, we've got scalp treatments that we can do using products like salicylic acid that can really help with scale or excessive sebum or any build-up on the scalp. There's a lot of scalp conditions that people have that can build up that we can help to clear and clarify and maintain.
Right.
But you never know. Do you know what I mean? If you don't, we've also got things like dermatoscopes. So, you said about you wish someone could come along and scan you. Well, we can kind of do that with the scalp. We've got microscopes, we've got dermatoscopes. We can take the hair and we can look at it 100 times under the microscope. We can look at your scalp. You can even measure the density of how many hairs are in a certain area of your head.
Wow.
And then every 3 to 6 months, we can update that so you can actually physically see whether your hair loss is improved or deteriorated. So, I mean, it may be if you're not willing to do, because for male pattern hair loss, for example, there is only so much we can do. And some of the treatments are quite invasive. So you might want to use something like minoxidil, or you might go down the route of a hair transplant. Well, that's obviously quite a lot. But again, we can advise. I know.
I mean, I get it, and I get it. It must be difficult for some guys to totally lose their hair, and for women to be, this is that's their hairs. That's what the first thing people see, isn't it? So yes, it must be quite upsetting if you're losing clumps, or you're going bald, you've got alopecia, or and it is an unfortunate thing going on at the moment. So many people are getting ill, so they are having treatments for certain things, and of course it's going to be upsetting, but nice to know that there are treatments out there. So I'm sure there's lots of people out there that didn't realize. I've certainly never heard of a trichologist. So it just goes to show there's always light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, I'm a huge believer. I think there's a solution for everything. It's just that we might not know how yet. We need to find the person that does know how.
Exactly.
So if you're having any issues with regards to that, then obviously get in touch. Now, the last thing I wanted to pick up there was you said about lights, UV, and is that to do with absorbing vitamin D? How is that helping?
So there's lots of different ways that the lights can help. UV lights obviously help with things like psoriasis anyway. That is slightly, I think, to do with the vitamin side of it, and how your body responds to UV light. We have the infrared lights as well, which can act as a vasodilator, they can work on different problems. They're very warming as well. Obviously, we can do scalp massage treatments with that.
So when you're saying about, vasodilation, so anything warm, it's going to open up the pores. Would that have something to do then with, would it be sort of a collection of, it's been blocked? Is that one of the things or not? I'm just
I mean, there are a lot of ways. A lot of the products that we recommend would exfoliate and cleanse the hair follicles from the opening, otherwise known as a follicular orifice, which some trichologists like to say. If your hair follicle at the top is obviously blocked with sebum or dirt or products, then over time, of course, that's going to restrict the hair growth coming out. But we also need to remember that each individual hair, you might have 100,000 hairs on your head. Each individual hair has its own blood supply, and that is what gets the nutrients to it and keeps it alive. So if you're applying something like an irritant or a vasodilator, which a lot of the caffeine shampoos, that's their main aim, anything like that, the menthol shampoos, they act as an agitator, so that it does encourage blood flow to the hair root and the hair follicle. So then that will give the hair follicle nutrients, oxygen, keep it growing healthily, and it's all about, even if sometimes what you've got to remember is with something like pattern hair loss, genetic hair loss, is even if you've not lost any hair in 6 months, even if you're exactly where you were when you started, that's actually a win.
Right.
So, of course, we can't claim that we're going to grow everybody's hair back, but what we can do is make the hair and scalp working at its optimum levels and make the scalp the best it can be for you, so that you can have the most healthy, best hair that you can have.
Right. And that's all we can do. So I suppose, but so the poor blood circulation could also be a factor. Maybe that's why you sort of suggested, like, healthy lifestyle is going to help, because if you've got poor circulation, that's going to affect. So extremities. So exercise, I'm sure, is going to have an effect on it. Not a cure, but one of the things. So it does. Again, I love the fact that you're having this holistic approach, and I really hope that sort of come out of things, even since the madness of the last few years. What I do see with in different, obviously this is a completely different niche, but it's great that people are looking at the holistic approach. It's not just about putting products on your hair.
Well,
that.
this is my slight issue with the GPs, as you said, because they don't have much nutrition training either, because they're under so much pressure. So, I mean, by all means, just to clarify, if you come and see me, I'm not going to start saying that you need to do an hour workout every day and climb a mountain. However, we would talk about things like, do you get fresh air? Do you manage to walk 10 minutes a day? Do you manage to get out? Do you get any sunlight? Because these things do, again, help combat stress. They help our nutrition. They help all manner of things. So the benefit of the trichologist is that we will look at all aspects. So even if we decide that you need a steroid cream or a topical chemical ointment or whatever we decide, we will also be giving suggestions on lifestyle, nutrition, and other areas. So for us, because we've got that time, and it's important to us to get that background, we're not going to say, right, okay, you've got a hair loss issue, right, take this tablet. Oh, by the way, there's terrible side effects and you're going to be on it for the rest of your life, but I've ticked my box, off you go. So we can look at, and you'd be surprised, I think you need that time with someone, because all of a sudden, 50 minutes in, they'll say, oh, and by the way, my dad had a stroke 3 months ago.
Right.
And you're like, right.
But people don't... just not aware. And sometimes it takes having that conversation and verbalizing it even for them to have that realization themselves. So brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. Very interesting. There you go, something completely new today. Trichology. I mean, I've got dry skin, dry hair. I'm a cheat. I just braid it for ease, and I don't have to I don't really use any products or anything. So I keep it quite simple. But for those of you, if you are listening in and you have been wondering, like, where do you go? Where can you go to get help? So there is help here. So thank you for that. And for the rest of the listeners, I will be back next week with...
Welcome to the Coffee with Karen podcast, a weekly chat show discussing everything from holistic health to current affairs from a mental, physical and spiritual perspective. Get your weekly cup of positivity with a sprinkling of woo.